Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Today we're going to continue doing our state test review, okay? By the end of all of these videos, you're going to get a great refresher of everything we talked about this year so that by the time you take that test, everything's fresh on your memory and you're not having to struggle to remember what we've been talking about over this long year course. So thank you so much for making it here today, and we'll go ahead and get started. So what are we talking about today? Here are some of the standards that we're going to address. This is mostly talking about ATP and ADP, as well as talking about cellular respiration and photosynthesis. We'll also take some time to talk about anaerobic versus aerobic respiration. So this is mostly energy and how cells get energy. And remember that this is a pretty good portion of the state test. So this stuff, you're probably going to get questions on it. So it's great that you're here and following along. So let's go ahead and get started and see what we're talking about. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is cellular energy, okay? Cells, like everything else, need energy, but they only like energy in one form. They only can use energy in one form, and the form of energy they use is called ATP, okay? That stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so the energy your cells use is called adenosine triphosphate. A lot of times we just abbreviate that as ATP. Okay, the energy is stored in the bonds between the phosphates. So let me point out where the phosphates are real quick and you'll kind of see what's going on here. This is an ATP molecule, okay? It's called adenosine triphosphate. Tri here means three, like a tricycle has three wheels. Well, instead of three wheels, adenosine triphosphate has three phosphates. These are the phosphates, okay? You can kind of see these three repeating units right here. That's a phosphate, that's a phosphate, that's a phosphate, okay? ATP is kind of like a battery where we can use a lot of the energy in it and then we can charge it back up and use it over again. Most of the energy in this molecule is right here between the second and the third phosphate. So what happens is when we need energy to do something, we break this phosphate off, the bond releases some energy, we can use that energy to do what we need to, and then this molecule can be recycled, and if we add another phosphate to it, we just turn it back into ATP. So ADP is like a battery that doesn't have any juice in it, and then you charge it, and it turns back into ATP. And again, this is the form of energy that your cells use. So it doesn't matter what you're eating, that food has to be converted into ATP before your cells can use it, okay? So this is very, very important. Let's keep it going here. So next up, I want to talk about photosynthesis, okay? So what I want you to know about photosynthesis is that this is the process that autotrophs use to produce food for themselves. So a lot of organisms are autotrophs, things that can make their own food. This is like plants and algae. What they do is they use the energy from the sun and they use it to make food. And that's actually what the word photosynthesis means. You can see that the second part of that word, synthesis, means creation of, and photo means light. So photosynthesis means making something with light. And specifically, we're talking about making food, making glucose here. Okay, so I want you to know what the reactants of photosynthesis are. The reactants is what goes into the equation, and then we also want to know what the products are. So here you can see that sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, those are going to be the reactants. They come together to form glucose and oxygen. So glucose and oxygen are going to be the products of this reaction, okay? This is really good for us because the plants need the glucose for them to survive, and just a byproduct is oxygen, which of course is very important for animals. Large multicellular organisms need oxygen in order to make energy quickly, and so that's a great kind of win-win situation for us, right? So the autotrophs use this reaction, photosynthesis, to make their own energy. They make glucose through this. Once they have the glucose made, they still have to perform cellular respiration to convert that glucose into ATP. Because remember, ATP is the form of energy that cells like. Okay, so photosynthesis makes the glucose, but then they still have to do cellular respiration afterwards. Okay, so let's talk about cellular respiration a little bit. Okay, cellular respiration is the process by which glucose is converted into ATP. Okay, remember that's the form of energy that your cells really like. Okay, the equation here for cellular respiration, you can see the equation here, the C6H12O6 plus 6O2 yields 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus ATP. What's really going on here is that is glucose plus oxygen equals carbon dioxide, water, and ATP. And this is just a complicated way of saying something that you already know. What are things that you need in order to survive? You need food, right? That's what the glucose is. And then you're constantly breathing in all day. What element are you trying to get into your body when you're taking those deep breaths? You need oxygen. So the food and the air that you breathe come together through a chemical equation to make ATP. Some byproducts here are CO2. That's what you exhale, carbon dioxide, right? That's just the byproduct of cellular respiration. And we make a little bit of water here too. Okay, so let's take a closer look at cellular respiration, and you'll see that there's two different types of cellular respiration. We have aerobic respiration and we have anaerobic respiration. And these are kind of opposites of one another. In aerobic respiration, creates a lot of ATP, but it requires oxygen, okay? Anaerobic respiration creates less ATP, but it does not require oxygen. So just depending on the situation that you're in, you can do either one of these. Humans and most animals can do either one of these. We like to do the aerobic because it's more efficient. We get a lot more energy out of performing this, but you need oxygen. And sometimes your muscles can't get enough oxygen Imagine you're running a mile, right? The first half of the mile, you're feeling great. Your cells have all the oxygen that they need, so they're doing aerobic respiration. But by the time you get to that second half of the mile, now you're starting to get tired. You're taking those deep, heavy breaths. Your blood is pumping really hard. Maybe your body can't get the oxygen to the muscles as fast as they need to, and then your cells would start to do anaerobic respiration. So you just kind of switch in between these two all day, okay? Great, so let's keep the ball rolling here. Okay, so more information about cellular respiration here. So regardless of if there's oxygen or not, the first part of cellular respiration is always the same. We always start with glycolysis, okay? And let's break this word down, okay? So glycolysis. The second half of that word, lysis, means to split, and then glyco is talking about glucose. So what does glycolysis mean? It means splitting glucose, okay? And this is always the first part of cellular respiration, whether you have oxygen or not. It is technically an anaerobic respiration. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, and through this process, we make a net 2 ATP. We make 4 total, but it takes 2 to get the whole thing going, so we get 2 out of it, okay, as a net, okay? So we always start with glycolysis. From there, a couple of different things can happen. After glycolysis, if oxygen is available, we're going to do aerobic respiration. Remember, aerobic respiration is the form of respiration that requires oxygen, but it also makes a lot more energy, okay? Aerobic respiration takes place in the mitochondria of the cell, and there are 2 distinct phases. Okay, we have the citric acid, or the Krebs cycle, as 2 different names for the same thing. This generates 2 ATP per glucose molecule, and most of the energy here is made in the last part of aerobic respiration called the electric transport chain. And sometimes we'll just see this abbreviated as ETC, so electric transport chain. We can make up to 34 ATP per glucose molecule through this part of cellular respiration. Okay, in total, if all the conditions are perfect and everything goes exactly as it's supposed to, you can make a total of 38 ATP per glucose molecule through this process, but that number is slightly inflated. It's not always perfect. Sometimes you make less than that, just depending on the environment, right? So this is aerobic respiration. There's pros and cons to this. The pro is we make a lot more ATP. The con is it has to be in the presence of oxygen. So what do we do if we don't have any oxygen? That's when we'll do this next type of cellular respiration known as anaerobic respiration. Okay, so anaerobic respiration, this makes less energy, but you don't need oxygen to do it. Although oxygen is not the final electric transport receptor, the process still uses the electric transport chain. So think back to what we were just talking about. In aerobic respiration, we use that thing called the ETC, the electric transport chain. We do the same thing in anaerobic respiration, but we can't use oxygen, so the final product is a little bit different. Okay, so we're doing ETC here. What's going on next? Okay, so through this process, much less ATP is generated. A net of 2 ATP molecules are produced. So in aerobic, we were making 30 to 38. In anaerobic, we're making just 2. So you can see we make a lot less ATP here. In animals, a byproduct of anaerobic respiration is lactic acid. And lactic acid is the thing that causes your muscles to feel sore the next day. So I was talking about running that mile. Maybe you run a mile, maybe you run a couple miles. When you wake up the next day, your muscles might feel kind of sore. And the reason for that is that you have this byproduct called lactic acid. If your muscles don't have oxygen, they do this anaerobic respiration. It makes this byproduct called lactic acid, and that makes your muscles feel sore, okay? And certain types of bacteria, like yeast, what we'll do is something else known as fermentation, okay? So it's still anaerobic respiration, but instead of lactic acid, we have a byproduct called ethanol, and this fermentation is used in many aspects of human society. We use it to make certain foods and beverages, and so fermentation is just used in a lot of different parts of our society, but it's all just a form of anaerobic respiration. All right, so the last little slide I wanted to look at is just a breakdown of all this information. Let's take everything that we've talked about today and just kind of put it on this graphic organizer. Okay, so when it comes to cellular respiration, regardless of what's going on, you always start cellular respiration the same way. And you can see that the first step here is always going to be glycolysis. So glycolysis is always the first part of cellular respiration. Okay, after glycolysis, one of 2 things will happen, and it all is based off of is there oxygen or not. If there's no oxygen, you're going to take that top route where the gray is. Okay, if you do have oxygen, you're going to go the bottom route where the blue box is. Okay, so let's do anaerobic first. Okay, so we're doing anaerobic respiration. There's 2 types of anaerobic respiration, and it really depends on what kind of organism you are. Some types of bacteria and animals will do a type of anaerobic respiration known as lactic acid fermentation. And the reason it's called lactic acid is because that's the final product, is lactic acid. That's the thing that makes your muscles feel sore. Okay? If you're doing anaerobic respiration and you are yeast, you do a different type of fermentation known as alcoholic fermentation. And the reason it's called alcoholic fermentation is that the final product is ethanol, which is a type of alcohol. Okay, so let's go the bottom route this time. So now, again, you always do glycolysis first, right? It's the first part of cellular respiration regardless. If you have oxygen, we can do this route down here, okay? So we're going to do aerobic respiration. That's the type that requires oxygen. Okay? The first part of that process is known as the Krebs cycle, and again, another name for that is the citric acid cycle. This happens in the mitochondria. Okay? We don't make a lot of ATP here, but we use everything, we make everything that we're going to need for the last part of cellular respiration. So still in the mitochondria here, the last part is called the electric transport chain. Okay, again, that's sometimes abbreviated as the ETC. So the ETC, this is really where we make a lot of our ATP here. Okay, most of the ATP is made here, and the byproduct for this is just water. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of all the different types of respiration you can do. And remember that plants have to do photosynthesis and cellular respiration. It's not like they can just do the photosynthesis and be done there. Okay, so thank you so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort. And I hope everybody has a great day.